Nothing exposes Tom Sandoval's weakness faster than a woman yelling at him. There is no greater performance in the Vanderpump Rules archive than Tom Sandoval's melodramatic insistence that being yelled at by Stassi Schroeder during her book signing was traumatizing. Not embarrassing, not awkward. Traumatizing. In Sandoval's world, a raised voice from a woman is apparently on par with war wounds. The fact that a man who has spent more than a decade on reality television still cannot endure public criticism without a vein bulging from his forehead is almost impressive in its fragility. The irony, of course, is that Sandoval has never minded dishing it out. He can berate Katie Maloney in restaurants without a second thought, but the moment Stassi turned the tables, he shriveled into victimhood. It wasn't trauma he was experiencing, it was ego death. A woman dared to strip him of his self-appointed grandeur in front of an audience, and his misogynistic narcissism simply couldn't compute. Sandoval's favorite party trick has always been the grand gesture, picking up tabs, making a scene, reminding everyone he's the most extra man in the room. It's not generosity, it's currency for validation. But beneath the sequins and bravado lies a man who mismanaged his finances so spectacularly that he squandered the money his mother, who earned it through a dangerous and noble profession, entrusted to him. She gave it willingly, yes, but Sandoval treated it like confetti, tossing it into vanity projects that bled him, his girlfriend, and his best friend dry. Consider the disaster at TomTom. The majority owners welcomed Stassi's event. Why wouldn't they? A televised book signing meant free publicity, but Sandoval, petulant and unhinged, raged against it as though it were a personal affront. He lacked the basic managerial instinct to make the night work, refusing even Schwartz's suggestion that owners should roll up their sleeves when the bar faltered. Owners, in Sandoval's mind, are meant to be worshipped like Lisa Vanderpump, not working alongside their staff. His refusal to adapt didn't just reveal incompetence, it foreshadowed the spectacular implosion of Schwartz and Sandy's. This pattern extends beyond business. Sandoval thrives on spin. At Stassi's signing, when it became clear the group wasn't buying his victim narrative, he doubled down, feigned apology, then resurrected the grievance once Stassi was gone and unpopular. It's a textbook manipulation tactic. Recast oneself as the wounded party while vilifying the woman who dared call him out. He doesn't just think he's the smartest man in the room, he assumes everyone else is foolish enough to buy the rewrite. And yet, the cracks keep showing. Whether it's his melodramatic reaction to a bakery mocking him with a "Sandoval is a liar" cake, or his petulant attempts to bar Katie from business decisions she was more qualified to weigh in on, his mask slips repeatedly. Behind the eyeliner and theatrics is not a tortured genius, but the most tedious archetype in reality television, the spoiled rich boy who mistakes privilege for wisdom. Sandoval's upcoming legal entanglements over Ariana's house and Rachel Levis's lawsuit only cement the portrait of a man who weaponizes money, love, and power without a shred of accountability. He is not a visionary. He is not a leader. He is not even particularly clever. He is simply the original self-pitying show pony of Vanderpump Rules, endlessly performing his own victimhood while the audience watches the walls close in. That kiss between Schwartz and Raquel? It wasn't romance. It was a cover-up for something much darker. The infamous Mexico trip, Scheana's second attempt at a wedding spectacle, has gone down in Vanderpump Rules lore as one of the most grotesque displays of manipulation, collusion, and sheer stupidity ever filmed for Bravo. The alleged spark between Tom Schwartz and Raquel was never believable because it wasn't meant to be. Their kiss was not romance. It was theater. Theater designed to humiliate Katie, distract from Sandoval's actual affair, and feed the egos of three menacingly unserious people who fancied themselves puppet masters of a reality show. The kiss itself was painfully staged, a performance so unconvincing it ranks among the top 10 most cringe-inducing moments in series history. The lack of chemistry was glaring. Schwartz looked about as invested as one does in a TSA line, and Raquel delivered all the enthusiasm of a middle school play rehearsal. That was the point. It wasn't about them. It was about covering Sandoval's tracks and, more importantly, cutting Katie down once again. Make no mistake, Schwartz knew exactly what was happening. His loyalty has always belonged to Sandoval, not to the wife he spent a decade undermining. Hurting Katie has long been his preferred hobby, the twisted way he convinces himself that she still cares. What better opportunity than to participate in a ploy that both protected his buddy and publicly humiliated his ex? Sandoval reveled in the scheme, practically giddy as he watched the kiss unfold. It was a rerun of his own voyeuristic fantasies from early seasons, played out at Katie's expense, and cruelly under Ariana's nose. The Mexico diversion achieved multiple goals at once. Firstly, redirect suspicion away from Sandoval and Raquel, whose affair was already in motion. Secondly, provide Raquel with a storyline, however flimsy, as she transitioned from sweet pageant princess to chaos agent. Thirdly, target Katie, a woman the Toms clearly viewed as disposable, just another accessory who could be replaced once the men moved on to newer partners. And let's not forget the broader delusion at play. Sandoval genuinely believed he could produce the show himself, manipulating narratives as though the audience couldn't see the wires. Just as he once fancied himself a restaurateur who knew more than Lisa Vanderpump, here he believed a clumsy diversionary kiss could outsmart viewers, the cast, and basic common sense. The result was a half-baked plan executed by a people far too dim to realize their own transparency. As if this weren't cursed enough, Shiana's wedding itself was a spectacle of contradictions. A vow renewal disguised as a first ceremony, a bridesmaid, Raquel, already entangled in scandal, and a groom with his own dubious infidelities. The entire event was layered in betrayal, secrets, and the desperate illusion of fairy tale romance. Bravo alchemy at its bleakest. The most disturbing revelation in retrospect is how openly the men mocked the women to their faces. Schwartz himself once quipped, in front of Ariana and Raquel, that Raquel's type was taken men. What seemed like a throwaway line at the time now reads as a confession. An inside joke among conspirators who delighted in keeping secrets from the women they claimed to love. Ultimately, the Mexico trip revealed the cruel symbiosis between Sandoval, Schwartz, and Raquel. They weren't merely engaging in bad behavior, they were delighting in it, feeding off the secrecy, the betrayal, and the hurt it inflicted. They believed they were clever. They believed they were untouchable. In reality, they were nothing more than three stooges staging a farce, too blinded by arrogance to realize that their scheme would collapse the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Everyone calls Lisa Vanderpump a reality TV star. Wrong. She's the queen who built an empire out of drunken servers and bad decisions. It begins innocently enough. A man, recovering from a serious accident, stumbles upon Vanderpump Rules while confined to a hospital bed. What starts as idle channel surfing quickly turns into a full-blown addiction, because nothing accelerates recovery quite like watching grown adults humiliate themselves at SUR. The show's accessibility, however, seems as chaotic as its cast. In the US, it's anchored on Peacock, though some insist on YouTube TV, assuming one is willing to pay double for the privilege. Amazon with a Hayu subscription works in some regions, while Canadians are left with a frustrating shuffle of seasons on Netflix, where seasons appear and vanish with the whimsy of Bravo's scheduling department. Hulu occasionally throws its hat in the ring, though the streaming patchwork makes finding the show nearly as dramatic as the content itself. The fascination with the cast is predictable. Jax, long branded the show's villain, still manages to retain admirers, convinced he's a cool dude, rather than a cautionary tale in bad decision-making. Kristen Dutte, equally infamous, continues to inspire inexplicable affection, proof that chaos does, in fact, have a fan base. And then there's Lisa Vanderpump, the grande dame who spun her stint on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills into an empire. The restaurants, the properties, the diamond-studded brand. She is both the puppet master and the benevolent monarch. The show itself was born from one of her infamous house parties, when she had her SUR staff moonlight as caterers, proving once and for all that Lisa can turn even background servers into a reality TV franchise. What begins as guilty curiosity often becomes full immersion. Viewers are inevitably welcomed to the chaos, reassured that once you enter Lisa's pink and crystal kingdom, escape is not an option. Vanderpump Rules is not just a show, it's a gravitational pull, and apparently, even a hospital bed provides no protection from its orbit. Schwartz didn't marry Katie out of love. He married her out of fear. Katie and Tom Schwartz's wedding was, on the surface, a dream. Beautifully staged, tearful vows, a ceremony so moving it could almost convince the audience that this union stood a chance. Almost. The tragedy, of course, is that beneath the glittering production lay a relationship that should have ended long before a single petal was scattered down the aisle. Schwartz entered marriage the way he enters most things, reluctantly, spinelessly, and with someone else nudging him forward. His devotion was never to Katie, but to keeping the peace, a man so desperate to please the crowd that he routinely ignored the one person who actually needed his loyalty. Watching him leap into a river rather than take a shower before his own wedding said everything. He was never invested, only performing. The writing had been on the wall for years. Katie pressed for a proposal, he buckled, and instead of admitting he didn't want marriage, Schwartz clung to her out of fear of being alone. That is not romance, it's cowardice. It's no surprise the marriage collapsed, because it was doomed from the start. Sandoval's influence hardly helped matters. His favorite party trick was painting Katie as unreasonable for issuing an ultimatum, while he and Schwartz clung to each other with suspiciously more chemistry than they ever displayed with their respective partners. Perhaps it's no wonder that Ariana and Katie ultimately freed themselves from the exhausting cycle of playing second fiddle to the Tom show. Schwartz's failure runs deeper than his marriage. At 44, he remains a man without an identity outside of the interchangeable roles of VPR's Schwartz, one of the Toms, or Jax's buddy. He rails against the way his father treated women, yet repeats the cycle himself, treating Katie with the same disregard he claimed to despise. Therapy could break the pattern, but that would require a level of self-awareness and backbone that Schwartz has yet to demonstrate. Even distance from Sandoval offers little hope. Whether they're still close or not, Schwartz's problem isn't proximity to toxic friends. It's his refusal to grow up. He is perpetually the fun summer fling who overstayed his welcome, never the husband Katie, or anyone, deserved. Katie, meanwhile, seemed more in love with the idea of a wedding than a marriage. Perhaps she feared losing her place in the group more than losing Schwartz himself. Vanderpump Rules has a way of trapping its cast in arrested development, freezing them in their 20s long past the point of maturity. And in that environment, Katie and Schwartz's wedding was less about building a marriage and more about producing a moment. The result was a stunning ceremony, beautifully shot and remembered fondly by viewers. But that is all it ever was, a production. As a partnership, it was never going to work. They wanted us to forgive Tom Sandoval. Yes, that Tom Sandoval. Let's talk about the worst redemption arc Bravo has ever tried to sell. Rewatching the Season 10 reunion of Vanderpump Rules is a reminder of what the show once did brilliantly: rally the cast around a wounded heroine and unleash a glorious mob against a villain who deserved every ounce of scorn. Ariana, freshly betrayed, stood at the center as friends sharpened their claws in her defense. For a moment, there was solidarity, conviction, and, dare it be said, moral clarity. Then came Season 11, and with it, a baffling pivot. Suddenly, the same cast that once shouted down Tom Sandoval began nursing a sympathy campaign on his behalf. As if viewers would suddenly warm to a man who embodies smarmy insincerity and weaponized victimhood. The attempt at a redemption arc was not only tone-deaf, it was insulting. Sandoval never displayed remorse or humility, only the petulance of a man enraged that the woman he betrayed dared to come out stronger than he did. The enablers, however, are where the real tragedy lies. Lala Kent, who was a ferocious force during the Season 10 reunion, squandered her hard-earned audience goodwill by demanding Ariana grieve on her timeline, as though 4 months was an expiration date for heartbreak. Katie Maloney, by contrast, emerged as the quiet hero. Once criticized for her own mean girl tendencies, she proved loyal when it mattered most, standing firmly beside Ariana. It is doubtful Ariana fully realized Katie's value as a friend until the scandal exposed it. Sheena Shea's role, predictably, was one of opportunism. Long accused of chasing relevance, she positioned herself as a bridge to Sandoval's redemption, only to be left gnawing at her own credibility when the public refused to buy it. Production. In its desperation to keep ratings sky high, happily threw her and Lala under the bus by framing them as his misguided champions. Lala was tossed a lifeline with The Valley, but Shiana is left chewing the bitter reality that she miscalculated spectacularly. Meanwhile, Schwartz continues his slow-motion character assassination. Forever dressed in sheep's clothing, he remains the show's most dangerous coward, his charm masking a spinelessness that has cost him friendships, credibility, and literal millions. Katie's long-overdue exit from their marriage deserved far more sympathy than it ever received. As for Rachel Leviss, her implosion needs no embellishment. She entered the scandal with a veneer of wide-eyed innocence, only to reveal herself as robotic, cold, and astonishingly oblivious to the chaos she and Sandoval unleashed. Her post-show podcast, an exercise in self-pitying victimhood, merely confirmed that she has learned nothing. Ariana, conversely, played the long game. While others rushed to podcasts and press tours to cash in, she stayed silent until the frenzy had crested. By then, her opportunities were bigger, her brand stronger, and her composure intact. That restraint infuriated Sandoval most of all. She won without groveling, without begging, and without falling apart. The saddest part of all is how familiar this cycle feels. The cast expected Ariana to get over it for the sake of filming, just as others had been pressured in seasons past. They assumed a new boyfriend and a thriving career meant she should be willing to play nice with her betrayer. They assumed wrong. In the end, the so-called redemption was doomed from the start. Sandoval remained the same egomaniac he had always been, while production's halo-light editing of James Kennedy, a man with his own troubling history, only highlighted the absurdity of trying to rewrite villains and heroes. Season 10 ended with two women, Katie and Ariana, finally landing on top, proof that loyalty and resilience matter more than performance. Season 11, in its attempt to muddy that clarity, merely reminded us why audiences rally so hard for their downfall. Because sometimes the villain doesn't deserve redemption. Sometimes he deserves exactly what he got. Here's what no one admits about Tom Sandoval. He only looked good because Jax Taylor was worse. Tom Sandoval has always been enamored with his own reflection, but his descent into unchecked ego has been one of Vanderpump Rules' more predictable tragedies. In the early years, there were flashes of sincerity, but those quickly evaporated as his self-importance ballooned. For a long time, Sandoval benefited from Jax Taylor's chaos. Standing next to the show's resident disaster made him appear thoughtful by comparison. Once Jax was gone, the mask slipped, and Sandoval's smugness became impossible to ignore. His disdain for Stassi Schroeder remains one of his most glaring insecurities. Stassi had the elusive quality he has always craved. Actual star power. That's why he unraveled at her book signing, seething with the realization that her influence eclipsed his endless monologues and ill-conceived business ventures. His fixation was so consuming that it even dictated Ariana Madix's friendships. Despite getting along well with Stassi at times, Ariana kept her at arm's length, largely because Sandoval's constant rants had branded Stassi and her allies as mindless minions. His record with women has always carried an undercurrent of disdain. The contempt he showed Katie Maloney from the beginning was never about her as much as it was about his need to establish dominance. Misogyny cloaked in self-righteousness is still misogyny, and Sandoval has wielded it with the enthusiasm of a man convinced he's the smartest in every room. Unfortunately for him, his genius has rarely extended beyond demanding control of Schwartz's every move or launching tirades at parties where no one asked for his leadership. For all the grandeur he assigns himself, Sandoval is not a visionary, nor even particularly clever. He is a narcissist with delusions of brilliance, a man whose manipulations are clumsy enough to be spotted in hindsight, yet damaging in the moment. And as his legal troubles loom, one can only hope the courts are less indulgent of his theatrics than his castmates have been. Everyone loves to call Ariana the hero of Scandoval, but here's what they don't tell you. She wasn't exactly fair to Anne either. Season 11 of Vanderpump Rules unintentionally handed viewers one of its strangest supporting characters, Anne, Tom Sandoval's personal assistant. Her presence became a quiet subplot of the Scandoval chaos, and while she was supposed to be an invisible employee, the cameras made sure she was anything but. Sandoval, predictably, was a disastrous boss. Self-absorbed, narcissistic, and prone to treating Anne as a personal maid rather than an assistant. She handled his errands, cleaned up after his parties, and played mediator between two adults old enough to manage their own mess. If anyone in this dynamic behaved childishly, it was Tom. But Anne's story doesn't end with Sandoval's incompetence. Ariana, hailed as the wronged heroine of Scandoval, didn't exactly cover herself in glory either. She dangled the idea of hiring Anne as her assistant, let Anne believe there was a future beyond Sandoval's circus, and then backed out, citing that it would be too complicated. Soon after, Sandoval cut Anne loose, and Ariana never followed through. Yes, Ariana and Katie eventually pulled her into the sandwich shop orbit, but her role was unclear and ultimately insignificant. This tug-of-war left Anne in a peculiar position, half pawn, half opportunist. On one hand, she was exploited by both Sandoval and Ariana, each using her for convenience. On the other, Anne leaned into her quirky, kooky persona to carve out 10 minutes of reality TV relevance. She wasn't a child. She was a paid employee who knew what she signed up for, and at times seemed more interested in screen time than in discretion. Her Instagram complaints about reduced hours at Something About Her only reinforced the impression that she was angling for sympathy as much as employment. The result? A figure who never quite fit. Anne was neither villain nor victim, but something far less satisfying, a Hollywood opportunist caught playing both sides. And in a cast filled with messy narcissists, it takes real talent to stand out as unnecessary. Here's what no one wants to admit about Brock Davies. Being friendly doesn't make him a good guy. Brock Davies is a man who inspires wildly conflicting reviews, depending on where one happens to encounter him. TomTom, BravoCon, or the ice cream line. On the surface, he presents as approachable, chatty, and eager to make himself known. He buys shots for strangers, drags his wife over for introductions, and makes sure no one leaves without a selfie. It's all very enthusiastic, bordering on desperate, and one can't help but notice the recurring theme. Brock is never just along for the ride. He is determined to be seen. That eagerness, however, frequently crosses into attention-grabbing. Accounts of him interrupting Shiana's conversations or trying to redirect focus to himself paint the picture of a man who cannot resist center stage. Even at a library event, the detail isn't his support for Shiana, but his swishy pants and suspicious footwear. At BravoCon, he hovered in the background like a prop, plastered with a grin, but contributing nothing of substance. If Sheena was the one hustling for record sales, Brock was content to stand there and play the role of supportive plus one, a role he seems oddly proud of, given how conspicuously he performs it. And then there is the darker undercurrent, the allegations of his past in Australia. Stories of affairs, estranged children, and a history of questionable choices stick to him like cheap cologne. The Vegas tale of him grifting his way from a one-night couch crash to a supposed NFL tryout is less a character assassination than a cautionary parable. Brock always seems to be chasing the next opportunity, whatever it may be. What emerges from all these scattered encounters is not a portrait of a villain, but of a man who is nice in the most calculated sense. He's charming when it serves him, personable when eyes are on him, and endlessly eager to play the part of a reality TV husband. But nice does not equate to good. The distinction matters. His friendliness appears situational, tethered to business prospects, fan perception, and, above all, Sheena's spotlight. The result is a man both affable and unsettling, perpetually performing, perpetually seeking, and perpetually reminding the world that yes, he is here too. Everyone worships Ariana as the victim, but here's the dirty truth. She played the same role with Kristen that Rachel later played with her. Every now and then, someone attempts the mental gymnastics routine of suggesting Tom Sandoval was madly in love with Kristen. A generous reading of their time together might indeed reveal that Tom was more emotionally entangled with Kristen than with anyone who came after. But let's be clear. Love, ego sui. Love, in Sandoval speak, bears little resemblance to what healthy adults mean by the word. It's more like a mix of codependence, image management, and just enough masochism to keep the cameras rolling. Yes, Sandoval defended Kristen even after she slept with his best friend of 10 years. That's less a sign of undying devotion and more proof of his addiction to performance, the role of loyal boyfriend, no matter how spectacularly betrayed. One could argue he and Kristen were equals in dysfunction. They both cheated, both humiliated each other, both clung to the ruins. In a twisted way, it was the most balanced relationship he's ever had. What lingers is the irony. Sandoval, who would later devastate Ariana with his carefully engineered betrayal, was first on the receiving end with Kristen. She wounded his ego in a way he never recovered from, which perhaps explains why he spends subsequent relationships reenacting the same drama, this time ensuring he controls the script. When Kristen called their romance glorified roommates during the reunion, Sandoval nearly burst with indignation, insisting theirs was some sweeping love story. If that was true, it was a love story written in laxatives, insults, and a complete lack of fidelity. Still, Kristen left the deepest mark. She hurt him in ways no later partner quite managed, and his obsession with her lingered far longer than he admitted. His bitterness over her moving on with James was proof enough. No one flies into that kind of rage over an ex they've supposedly outgrown. For Sandoval, Kristen remained the benchmark of both torment and validation. Ariana, of course, entered the picture not as an innocent bystander, but as the best friend who slid into the role of girlfriend while Kristen was still firmly in the narrative. She played the part of the supportive confidant, all while positioning herself for the inevitable transition. The idea that she and Sandoval only shared one kiss before he ended things with Kristen is about as believable as Sandoval's fake tears at a reunion. Their emotional affair was blatant, their physical one inevitable. Ariana was the girlfriend every woman side-eyes, the one who insists she's just a friend, while circling the relationship like a hawk. And here's the recurring pattern. Sandoval always has the next woman queued up before the current one is officially discarded. Kristen with Ariana, Ariana with Rachel. It's the same tired storyline dressed up as romance. His partners accept his narcissism until it turns on them, at which point they suddenly discover he's untrustworthy. Astonishing. This is why love with Sandoval is a joke. He does not love women, he exploits them. He undermines their confidence, criticizes their bodies, and conditions them into believing his warped narrative. He has mastered the art of making himself the good guy, even while lying, cheating, and humiliating his partner on national television. Kristen, Ariana, Rachel. They're interchangeable supporting actresses in the Sandoval show. The tragedy isn't that Sandoval can't love, it's that people still try to argue he did. At best, he was more emotionally invested in Kristen than Ariana because she was the one who hurt him first, and the wound became his entire identity. But confusing obsession and image preservation with madly in love only flatters him. Sandoval's only true love story is with himself, and unfortunately for every woman who's ever taken his bait, that romance shows no signs of ending. They say Lala Kent's podcast is back by popular demand. But here's the truth. No one demanded Easton, and certainly not his dreadlocks. Lala Kent's podcast was once an entertaining sideshow, an outlet that at least promised some unfiltered thoughts from a woman who carefully curated every ounce of her Vanderpump Rules persona. But any faint glimmers of intrigue have long been suffocated under the weight of one man's dreadlocks, one family's codependency, and one woman's inability to separate her personal life from her professional one. The rebrand promised freshness. Instead, listeners are now treated to the recurring presence of Easton, Lala's brother, billed back by popular demand, though one has to wonder whose demand exactly. The checkout clerk? The woman at the DMV counter? Or perhaps just Easton himself, alongside their mother, who remain her most captive audience? For the general public, the answer is obvious. No one is asking for this. Easton brings nothing to the table. His laugh alone, part squeal, part nasal tee-hee-hee, is a sonic assault, while his white boy dreadlocks veer into cultural appropriation and, frankly, visual offense. He doesn't enrich the show with insight, wit, or charisma. Instead, he drags it further into the abyss of familial enmeshment. What could have been an entertaining look into Lala's perspective is now just a boundaryless echo chamber, with her brother and mother serving as unpaid, or more likely, financially dependent, satellites in her orbit. The dynamics here are unsettling. Lala has made Easton the man of the house since their father's death, a role that includes babysitter, employee, roommate, and emotional stand-in. It's an arrangement that makes one wonder how any girlfriend, fiancé, or wife could ever comfortably enter his life. Every potential partner is bound to be cast as the villain the moment Easton asserts independence. Imagine him wanting children of his own, children who would take his attention away from Ocean and Sosa. Catastrophe. This isn't family first, it's control dressed up as closeness, a version of codependence that has shades of Flowers in the Attic, rather than healthy kinship. Easton and their mother remain financially and emotionally tethered to Lala, who, by calling them her orcapod, openly brands them as closed off from the outside world. The moment Easton dares to individuate, one can already picture the fallout. The lack of boundaries seeps directly into the podcast. Rather than producing a cohesive show with a theme or identity, Lala simply recycles personal anecdotes, family banter, and Bravo gossip. Without structure, it plays as a lazy hour of filler disguised as content. She is neither eloquent nor generous enough to carry a solo platform, and with Easton's intrusive presence, what little she offers is swiftly extinguished. Even when guests appear, they are often random friends or acquaintances drafted into service, with none of the chemistry or polish seen in successful podcast duos like Giggly Squad or Two T's in a Pod. And when a promising co-host, Jessica, once tried to collaborate, Lala predictably imploded at the notion of sharing creative control, forcing her to walk away. Insecurity triumphs again. Lala likes to market her insularity as edgy and self-protective, but it reads as pathetic. She has no real friends, no sustaining connections outside her mother and brother, and no professional identity strong enough to give her podcast traction. Her bitterness and reputation as a disloyal friend eclipse any attempts at reinvention. Even her so-called rebrand has already collapsed under the weight of Easton's forced involvement. The result is a podcast that isn't a podcast so much as an extension of her living room. No themes, no brand, no clear direction. Just a stuck-up brat propping herself up with family members because she cannot maintain lasting friendships or build a career that stands on its own. Easton, with his dreadful dreads and unbearable laugh, is less a co-host than a living reminder of her stagnation. Listeners don't want Easton. They don't want her mother. They don't want the closed-off, control-freak dynamic of an orcapod. What they want, if they want anything at all, is Lala herself, unfiltered, accountable, and perhaps even interesting. Until she can manage that, the podcast remains what it currently is: a nothing.